Well, greetings, LifeBridge. This is our Big Wednesday live event, and I want to introduce you to Dr. Kevin Van Lant. Dr. Van Lant is the Director of Pastoral Care and Counseling, as well as an Associate Professor of Christian Ministry and Leadership up at Talbot Seminary and Biola University. And Dr. Van Lant was supposed to be joining us live last month, and then again this coming month. But obviously, due to COVID-19, that has made it impossible to do that. And we're just so grateful to have you here via a video, Dr. Van Lant. Thank you for joining us. And if you want to give a brief introduction, I would love to invite you to do that. And then also just maybe start right off the bat and just say, hey, what are some things we can do to maintain mental health in this season, really in any season, when it comes to our mental health and emotional health and all those things. And thank you again for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but maybe sometime down the road. Yeah, you've described my role at Talbot and at Biola, I think, very well. I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I have a part-time clinical practice as well, and I work for a large Christian counseling group up in Orange County. So I have my feet in both worlds, in the academic world and the clinical world, and which is really ideal for me because I like both of those environments, and I feel like each kind of feed the other. In terms of sort of how does one stay healthy during this season of time, there are some unique challenges about this season of time, and then I think there are some challenges that are just true maybe in all times. In my clinical work, I'm continuing to see patients during the COVID crisis here, and I think what I'm finding is that anything that was there prior to the COVID-19 pandemic has been intensified since. So people who maybe were wrestling with loneliness, wrestling with depression or anxiety or addiction tendencies, I've just seen that exacerbated by this whole event. Part of that is clearly, it's not rocket science to know that if you were already feeling lonely and now you're basically being told to stay at home, you're going to feel more lonely. I think so much of our mental health is tied to meaningful connection to others. And this has been a season of time where I'm finding people are struggling with maintaining a meaningful connection to others because we're just not able to be with others in the way that we were prior. So we're not able to see a friend and get that hug, or we're not able to spend time just, kind of in a physical proximate kind of experience, and that really does bring a great sense of well-being. On the flip side of this, I've also found that for some people, they have kind of they almost tell me with a little bit of guilt in their voice that they're actually really enjoying this time because it's the first time they've been able to kind of slow down and not deal with traffic and commuting, that life feels like it's at a slower pace, and they're able to spend more time with family and really experience, I think, a different, maybe even pace of spending money and all these other things. So there's sort of this continuum I'm finding where there are some people who are really suffering. There are some people that actually kind of almost enjoy this kind of, as a friend of mine called it, the great pause, that there's this moment of time where everything just kind of stopped. And so I think kind of recognizing where one is within that continuum, and acknowledging the need that's a part of this, acknowledging the need for others, acknowledging the need for meaningful connection, and I think even acknowledging the losses that have been a part of this time. So the losses that are connected to maybe not being able to spend kind of close, contacted time with friends, maybe with colleagues, that work feels maybe you've even lost your job temporarily, or maybe just the sense of connection you had to your job has been lost. So I think in many ways, there was an interesting article in Harvard Business Review where the author described this feeling. He said that strange feeling you have might be grief. And I think for a lot of us, we're sort of grieving the normalcy of life that's been lost and trying to figure out how do we move through this time of disorientation. So I could probably speak for a whole hour about this, but those are a few of the thoughts that come off the top of my head.
Yeah, one of the questions we got from somebody in our church was, how do you recognize in yourself or someone else, maybe a loved one, when this goes beyond kind of the normal struggles, and when does it start entering into the category of maybe having a struggle with mental health, and how do you begin to have that dialogue and discussion with yourself or with others to start a journey of recognize that and maybe toward some greater healing?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to break that down into just the very kind of basics. But one of the things I talk with my students about is this idea of what's referred to as the 4 Ds. And these are the 4 Ds, I think, in some ways of mental illness, which are, we'd start out with this idea of deviance. And although deviance sounds like a really horrible idea, but what we're really talking about is, does the person's behavior, does their engagement in the world and so on kind of deviate markedly from what we would expect, from what we think of as something that's kind of normative? Now, obviously, there's a large continuum within that, but we really look for, is their functioning deviating markedly? Are they hearing voices? Are they experiencing things that really seem quite out of the ordinary? The other one is distress. Are they having a personal experience of distress? For instance, is their depression causing them to just feel deeply sorrowful all the time, or really in a great deal of pain? Or is their anxiety so severe that they're just kind of racked by feelings, these intense feelings of anxiousness, right? So is the distress kind of boiling up to a place where they're noticing it? The other one is dysfunction, and oftentimes that word's been so overly used, but what we really mean by dysfunction is, are the things that they would normally be able to do things that they're not capable of right now? So for instance, are they not, I was talking with somebody, a patient of mine just recently, who is having the hardest time even just taking care of these basic things of life, like getting up and taking a shower, getting dressed in fresh clothes every day, just even making a meal, because the depression has felt so severe that the dysfunction has increased to a level where they're just literally not functioning well in these aspects of life. And the last one is what we refer to as danger. So are they a danger to themselves or to others? And has their despair gotten to a point where they're questioning whether they want to live anymore? Or are they using kind of self-harm techniques like cutting and whatnot to avoid or to deal with their pain? That's a pretty severe direction. But I think when we're talking about how do you recognize if somebody's dealing with mental illness or not, you're looking at a lot of markers, some of those that are more difficult to see than others. But usually what we're seeing is sort of a collection of things, right? It's usually not just one thing. We're kind of putting all this into a package and saying, okay, does the accumulation of all these parts seem to be at a point where I'm getting concerned for this person? How one then sort of talks about that with a loved one or a spouse or someone else, or kids that might be struggling. My encouragement typically is to kind of wade in gently. You don't want to come in too strong, right? You don't want to make too severe of a statement, because you'll get a lot of defensive kind of pushback from that, depending on how connected they are to what they're experiencing. So a lot of times what I suggest is something very empathic, right? So something like, it seems like you're really suffering, or it seems like you're really struggling with kind of doing the things that you used to do pretty easily, or it seems like maybe the things you used to enjoy, you're not enjoying anymore, or it seems hard to kind of do the things you used to do pretty easily. And I think when you can put it into more empathic language, the person will both feel cared for in the midst of it, but they're going to feel less defensive in their response to it as well, right? So again, this is another one of those things I could probably go for a long time.
For a long time. No, and it's excellent. Just kind of get those thoughts going and the conversations going. Maybe one more question is just what would be a step or two that you would encourage people, wherever they're at on that scale, either because of the COVID or with the 4 Ds you've mentioned, what would be a step or two of greater health, and especially when it relates to a greater church body? How can we take advantage of some of those resources available? And where would you tell someone to start to just get a little healthier in the next week?
Sure. Well, it starts really, I think, with acknowledging that you're struggling. And sometimes that's tough to do because some people will feel sort of embarrassed or ashamed, or they'll feel sort of the stigma of some of this struggle. But the truth of it is, a lot of people are struggling right now. A recent study just came out a couple days ago that said there's been an intensification, at least of 50% of people who are struggling before, they're struggling that much more. Or people that weren't struggling at all before are now reporting that they're actually struggling significantly. So I think kind of recognizing that you're kind of in the norm if you're struggling at this point, right? Secondly, I think the church has this profound responsibility and capacity to respond to the need for connection that people in your church community might be experiencing. And so what I really tend to believe kind of deeply, aside from a meaningful spiritual life, which I'm hoping we're all developing, but is that really healing is almost always going to happen in the context of community and connection with others. And so my encouragement is to really kind of lean into that reality, that it's very hard to move through this alone. It's always better when we're kind of trying to move through this and cope with this with others that have a meaningful connection to us. I know this is hard in the midst of this time, and especially if maybe people are feeling depressed or feeling anxious, but I'm a big believer in exercise. And there's a tremendous amount of data out there to support the notion that exercise can be as effective as an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication in terms of responding to our emotional well-being. God built us to move, right? And kind of the opposite of movement is to feel stuck. And stuckness really connects with notions related to everything from trauma to really helplessness and powerlessness. And so what I find for people is their ability to move, exercise, especially if they can get out in some fresh air and some blue sky. And you guys are down there in beautiful, right, San Diego area. So you guys have a lot of great weather. And so I think kind of, get out and move, connect with others, contact your elders, contact people within your church body, and let them know, I'm struggling. I need somebody to talk to, and I'm sure someone within your community would be happy to do that.
Yeah, and I think you're a very normal guy, and unfortunately, in some circles, even in faith communities, there's still a little bit of a stigma attached with seeing a counselor or a therapist, or a psychologist, psychiatrist. And maybe the final thought is, why is that a powerful thing for some people, especially during certain seasons of their life, to capitalize and utilize that tool?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I know there's a pretty big stigma attached to my profession, right? And maybe it's the leftovers of Freud, and some wacky people that have been doing this work. But I think maybe just a couple of thoughts around that is, one is God, it's interesting in scripture, even with Adam and Eve, when God was sort of acknowledging to Adam, it's not good to be alone. You need a helper. And I think in one sense, that's really a core aspect of what it is to be human. We're really not very good alone, number one. And number two, it oftentimes takes another person who isn't personally wrapped up in the world that you're in to kind of maintain a bit of objectivity, and then the training to kind of understand what might be underneath that, and to connect the dots in a way that begins to make sense of our story. Because so often we need to have a coherent personal narrative. Like, we need to know internally our story, not the story we've been told, right? Because sometimes that story is really at odds with a certain even aspect of reality. But I think sometimes somebody that can help us kind of understand our story more objectively, and to be able to connect the dots in a meaningful enough way that I think we can really begin to engage in truth. And really that's, I think, not only biblical, but I think from a psychological perspective, it really is where health starts to develop. So there are a lot of layers to that one as well. But my encouragement would be to really connect with somebody who can help, whether it's a pastoral counselor, whether it's a therapist, whether it's spiritual director, whether it's somebody that's just going to be able to help you walk through this process with wisdom, with spiritual attunement. And I think that's so awesome when people can do that.
That's amazing. And just I want to thank you for your time. We look forward to having you down here in the months ahead. And, that's one of the things we want to encourage you, if you're watching this video, that we do have, pastoral care involved. We have elders who'd love to pray with you. We have life groups that are available for kind of just the regular routine of life. And so we want to invite you into that. There'll be a link attached with this video that you can find out more about any of those outlets. And just want to thank you, Dr. Van Lant, for your time. And we look forward to having you down here soon. And take care, be safe, and enjoy this last week or so of school and seminary. And we hope to see you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure. I look forward to it.